That was me last time.
Oh, is that your tea?
Yeah, I got a new one.
Oh, yeah. That was your pen too? Is that yours? Look right.
This is my pen. Good evening and welcome to the January edition of the Public Works Committee. First time we meet in 2023. I'm joined by my fellow council members, John Larson, Annette Scipio, and Vice Chair Barbara Burke. Tonight we have 2 items on consent agenda and 2 on general. If there are any items on the consent agenda that someone would like to pull, please let me know at this point.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull C1, please.
C1, can I get a motion to approve the balance?
So moved.
Second.
All right, let's vote when the option comes up. There we have it. Okay, Mr. Murphy, you're going to present on this. I was going to pull this too, just because it's kind of a technical item and I'm not sure everybody understands what it's about, but we can just.
Not sure that I am either.
Would you like it to be read first?
No, just.
Okay. All right.
If we could just go to the PowerPoint real quick.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair McIntosh and members of the committee.
Good evening.
Council members, good afternoon. This is what I would call more of a housekeeping issue. A little bit of history. The provisions dealing with subdivisions, streets, platting has been in the ordinance since the 90s. But until we did the UDO clear code adoption several years ago, the subdivision regulation portion of the ordinance was wholly within the purview of the planning board. But whenever the city council and the county commissioners adopted UDO clear code and put it all into one document, that we're now bringing more things to you that we wouldn't have in the past. A little bit of history. We used to allow for a developer, whenever they got their subdivision approved, to bond 100% of their improvements, be able to record the plat, and be constructing their infrastructure while they were also building the houses. We ran into some issues in the mid-2000s where we had some folks living in some homes that didn't have public sewer yet constructed, that didn't have roads that were installed and passable. And I would say those were not local developers that did that. They were more out-of-town developers that did that. They kind of took advantage of our regulations. So we changed the regulations and the pendulum swung back to where you had to have everything in before you could get a plat recorded. Well, that took the pendulum too far, so we swung the pendulum back in the middle in the early 2010s. And what this text amendment does is require that the first, i.e. the bottom layer, the initial layer of asphalt on subdivision streets be installed prior to the acceptance of any financial surety, which then allows the recordation of the plat. And this has been engineering's practice and planning's practice for the last 10 years. I think some of the language that was written with that last amendment in the early 2010s had an issue with it. This is what we have been doing. We got to the point where an out-of-town developer wanted to push the envelope and say, well, this is what your ordinance says. So this is why we're bringing this forward. We want to codify what we've been doing. And this was requested by engineering to clarify the street construction requirements, which must be met prior to the signing of a plat, which again then leads to being able to sell lots. It codifies existing policy to reduce potential developer confusion. Again, local developers have understood this has been our process, but out-of-town developers do not. Those first 2 points are kind of what I just reiterated or what I went over. This amendment was presented to the Quarterly Development Forum back at our meeting in September. There were no issues or concerns that were raised at that time. We followed that up once the details of the ordinance were written. We emailed a copy of this amendment to all of those folks that are on and participate in the quarterly development forum, asking them to let us know if they had any comments, and we received none. This did go to the Planning Board public hearing back in December. There was no one that spoke in opposition, and Planning Board did recommend unanimously for approval. So again, just to boil it down to its essence, the ordinance today is less than clear that you have to have that the bottom layer of asphalt down. And as a result, there are concerns from engineering that lots could be conveyed and folks could be occupying homes on streets that are made of gravel, which is an issue.
Questions from committee?
So this only applies to the streets, does not apply to sewer, water, or any of the other utilities?
Correct. Those things can still be there are things that can be bonded. Only thing this change does is change how we currently treat streets as far as the language.
Streets.
Most of those things do already have to be installed.
So it just guarantees there's a paved surface when they start selling lots?
Correct.
Correct. Thank you.
Anyone else? And just so people know, the quarterly development meetings that are held are kind of a roundtable with the folks who are doing business on a regular basis, building homes and doing subdivisions. And it's a really good effort to get people engaged, involved. The questions come up before they hit the fan, as it were. So that's
Correct.
a very effective process. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, this is a CARF. If I could get a motion for approval.
Move approval.
Second.
Thank you. I'm going to vote at the appropriate time. Unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone, and let's move on to the general agenda. Item G1, please.
G1, information on proposed amendments to the micromobility ordinance.
Everyone's favorite subject. Hello, Matthew.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, committee members.
Good evening.
So, believe it or not, it has been over 4 years since electric scooters first arrived in the city, and almost 4 years since City Council adopted the micromobility ordinance in 2019. So a lot has changed since 2019, and the goal remains, the goal for the ordinance updates and what we're proposing here is to provide great service for the customers of these companies, and then for us to remain a competitive market as well. So there's been a lot of changes in the micromobility field, a lot of acquisitions, a lot of mergers lately, just the technology, everything changes very quickly in this field. And we want to make sure that our ordinance, which is 4 years old now and hasn't been touched since 2019, stays relevant, stays current, and keeps us a competitive market while allowing us to meet our mobility goals as well. And one thing to note, we've had electric scooters in the field for 4 years now, but within 1 or 2 weeks, we'll have electric bicycles for the first time as well. So we'll have another mobility option for the community. So I mentioned the ordinance was adopted in 2019. We have 3-4 years of experience now with this. We know what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. And we've also reviewed our peer communities to see what they're doing. And again, we want to remain competitive with them and ensure that we continue to have this mobility option. So one of the most interesting things about the micromobility field is that we can collect a lot of data. So each of the devices is connected via GPS and via the cellular network. So we have anonymous data on pretty much every trip that happens. So we know how many trips, we know where they're happening, we know the streets where those rides are happening, we know the origin, the destinations, and that allows us to get a clear picture of what's going on, and allows us to plan for infrastructure improvements and for other, just making sure that the companies are deploying where it makes sense to do so. So you can see some of the stats here, 26,000 trips per year, the number of miles. One thing to note, that 24 minutes per trip is a little bit higher than the industry average, so I'm not sure what that says about our community if people are using the scooters for longer distance trips, for transportation. It's a little bit hard to determine, but that's something that's a little bit different. One important thing to note there is the note about the complaints. So we really receive very few complaints about parking. So that 6 complaints of illegal parking per month pertains to parking on the sidewalks where it may be blocking the sidewalk, but also parking on private property. So really only 6 complaints per month that Spin receives. And I don't recall the last time we received a complaint through CityLink about parking, actually. So there are very few complaints that we actually receive. Now, I'm sure there are other issues out there that aren't being reported, but from the reports that we do get, there are very few. And then you'll see that last note there is 14 proactive remedies. So we've asked the companies to do proactive sweeps of the community as well to make sure that before it becomes an issue that people have to report, that they're hopefully addressing some of those issues. So on average, they're fixing 14 issues before they can become complaints.
1 second, Councilmember Sigo has a question.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
Just for clarity, this is data across the last 4 years or 3 years or 2 years?
This is really the last year, ma'am.
Just 1 year,
Yep.
the last.
That's
So this
correct.
is like 2021 data?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
21, 22. Yeah, mostly 22, actually.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, that data is available on a daily basis, so we get updates and we can see where those devices are at any given moment, really. So it gives us a lot of control over the system and a lot of useful data that we can use to analyze. So in addition to the trip data, we also get great public feedback data. So we have worked with Spin to develop a survey, and they deploy the surveys through their mobile app, and they actually provide financial incentives for customers to provide feedback to us. So you can see here, we had a survey out for 3 or 4 months, I want to say, and we received over 700 responses to that. So what we're trying to get at with the survey was the motivations of people, why they're riding, what they're using the scooters for, how they're planning their trips, that kind of thing. So we can get a feel for what they're interested in, what customers are desiring, so that we can respond accordingly. So here you can see 67% of the customers decided to make their trip at the spur of the moment. Right when they saw the scooter, they thought, why not? Let's try this. So it lends itself to that type of decision making. Another question we asked was, where do you take the e-scooters? So overwhelmingly, the response was fun and recreation. But you can see social entertainment events. Some people are using the devices for work, to get to meetings, to get to school, and even to and from bus stops. So that's really one of the goals, certainly, is to expand the reach of our transit system. So I'm pleased to see that at least some people are using it for that purpose. And really, there's nothing wrong with people having fun on these scooters. I think it's, most of the trips are downtown. If people are having a good time downtown, all the better. If it provides the transportation on top of that, then that's even better. So the next question we asked was, what factors influenced you to choose a scooter for the trip that they had taken? Again, the fun factor comes up, but also the speed at which they can get around town. So it was a fast option, it was easy, it was convenient, it was inexpensive. You can see some of the other responses there as well. But this is important information for us to have so we can plan accordingly. So getting to the ordinance, and one thing I'll say before we start this discussion, we don't have any specific language on what the changes should be. These are just kind of general topics, ideas issues that we have seen with the ordinance that we think should be addressed. We don't have any specific language at this point. We're here just to gather your feedback and open up the discussion. So one of the requirements in the ordinance is a nightly pickup. So that was one of as we were developing this ordinance in 2019, we were surveying what other communities had included in their ordinances. A lot was changing at that time. There weren't a lot of clear ordinances. There weren't really best practices. We researched the best we could. But I think part of the reason we're coming here for some potential changes is that the market was so new, the field was so new at that time, that I think we included a lot in the ordinance just to cover our bases and make sure that we had a really thorough ordinance. So back to the nightly pickup requirement, we do require that right now. What we're proposing to allow, though, is for those devices to remain in the public right-of-way and just have the companies deactivate them. So people would not be able to ride those devices. They would just remain in the field. And you can see the justification there. Or I should say, we would also have to update the definition of abandoned, what an abandoned device actually is, because right now it says any device within the same place for 24 hours is considered abandoned. So that would have to be a corresponding update as well. In our research, we found that none of the other cities in the southern region for spin actually have that requirement in their ordinance. Operating hours, that's the next topic we'd like to take on. We currently allow rides between 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. Our proposal is just to extend that nighttime limit to 11 p.m. And you can see in Raleigh, they do take on that 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. time frame, and in Durham, they actually operate 24/7.
Matthew, hold on.
Yes.
1 second.
Excuse me, Matthew, would these hours vary during the weekend?
No, so right now, what we have is 7 days a week, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. That's what we're proposing for that change to be, 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., 7 days per week. But again, we have flexibility on that. It could be different for different days of the week.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Councilman Larson.
I don't
Yes.
know whether it's appropriate to go ahead and ask questions now. About recovery of the vehicles at night,
Yes.
what is the current status of being able to recover vehicles that are left all over the city? What is the company policies? Is it a 24-hour pickup? Do they recharge them, or what?
So so when they need to be recharged, they have to be brought back. Actually, they can swap the batteries at this point, so they don't have to bring the whole scooter back. The batteries are swappable, so they can just bring a new battery out to replace it.
What happens to the one that's just left on the sidewalk down in Old Salem or somewhere?
So, so if we see that, we'll report that to the company. If a complaint comes in, then they're required to respond to that within 2 hours. There's a proactive way we address those issues as well. So going back to the way the devices are GPS enabled. So we actually can set up geofences in certain areas, Old Salem Historic District included, so that if one of the devices enters that zone, it actually slows it down and stops it so it can't continue the trip through the zone. We also have that geofence set up for parking so that if somebody tries to end their ride within that zone or any of the other restricted zones, they can't actually end the ride. The app will not allow them to end that ride, so they have to move the device outside or just leave it there while the meter is running, basically, which they're not likely to do. So there are two preventive methods that we can use to kind of get the behavior that we want and kind of head off those types of issues before they actually happen.
I was trying to understand, during the COVID period and everything, the 6 complaints per month, 14 proactive remedies, trying to understand if the policy of removing, since we're talking about maybe eliminating the definition of pickup 24 hours within that time period, if we're likely to see the complaints of illegal parking and the need to proactive remedies go up. Some thought on that? Is there?
I think that the technology has really helped us in that regard, that when we set up these no ride zones and the no park zones, we do actually get very good compliance with that. If somebody may enter the zone, but they're not going to get very far before that device notifies them and actually slows down and stops. So we may get some on the periphery of those zones, some rides entering, but those rides aren't going to continue kind of deep into the zones, and they won't be able to park. So
I was specifically thinking about, you drive through town, apparently you see these renegade riders out in places, on the edge of town, just sitting there, maybe even for a day or 2 or 3 days. I've been by and they're just sitting on the sidewalk, and there's no recovery. There doesn't seem to be a recovery program that's very aggressive in pulling them back in. And apparently they're not getting complaints about them because they're fairly remote locations and not highly visible, whatever. I'm just the monitoring of these units, where they are and how they're retrieved. We're not nesting them anymore or anything like that. So the question sort of is where they end up and how long they stay there in a location. Because I think one of the things we need to evaluate as we look at rethinking this.
And yes, sir. And one of the things, we can do with the technology as well is to get a signal, notification every time a device is stationary for 48 hours or 36 hours. We can get a notification, have that go directly to the company so that they can go out and redeploy and move that scooter out.
Because they're not making money on their scooter when it's in the
Exactly,
same place
yes.
for
Yeah.
24 hours.
Right. So we want the devices to be spread throughout the community so that people can use them, and it adds kind of an organic element to it, that the scooters end up where they need to be used. But at times, you're right, there are scooters that will end up somewhere where it's just not going to be used. And in that case, we do want that notification, and we want the company to redeploy it.
Does the notification come to us, or does it come directly to the company?
So we get a notification through, there's a software as a service program that we use called Populous that notifies us. And then we can use that to notify the company.
Huh. So
But-
sorry, go ahead.
But is someone monitoring that notice at night?
So that, the software as a service that we use, Populous, that's actually, it gets a data feed. So all of the devices are sending data almost continuously. And that data feed, the company Spin is required, or any company that operates here, is required to provide us with that data feed. And we give it to Populous, and then they process it and present it to us through an online dashboard. So we can see where all of the scooters are. We can see how long they've been sitting out. We can set up all sorts of different policies that allow us to basically track the compliance with the ordinance without having to be in the field ourselves.
But bottom line, we've only had 6 complaints.
That's correct,
Over the
yes.
last year.
Yeah.
We have had 6 complaints, but that does not mean that the instruments are being picked up, because I've seen them throughout
Right.
my ward at night.
Yeah.
So they haven't been picked up, but I don't know if anyone would want to complain about them
Right.
on a basis, and whether people know where to complain to.
Right, and just as a reminder, this is
We'll
an
go,
information
yeah.
item, and so these are things that Matthew will take back and
Sure.
talk with his staff, talk with the company, and so this is not a CARF. Okay, so we're giving him feedback on where they're going.
Matthew, not to get too deep in the weeds, how many companies do we have providing scooters currently in the city?
We have one operating right now. Over the summer, we completed our annual permit application process. We selected 2 companies. We're waiting on that second company to kind of complete their agreement and pay their fee before they can launch their devices.
Great, thank you.
But our ordinance allows us to issue up to 2 permits each year.
Thank you, sorry to distract you there.
That's okay. So we talked about the operating hours. Response time for illegal parking. So right now, we have a 2-hour limit for how quickly the companies have to respond to complaints. So they have 2 hours to respond, regardless of the day of the week or the time of the day. To bring us into kind of the standard that other cities are using, we're proposing to keep that 2-hour limit between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, but then change that to the next day as soon as practicable if reported on a weekend or holiday. And that reflects the staffing that these companies have. They don't necessarily have 24/7 staff that are available. So I think this makes more sense in terms of just the companies meeting the ordinance and not constantly being in violation because they don't have staff working 24/7. With that said, the companies are required to provide us with a point of contact that staff can get involved, can contact at any time, and then they're required to address that issue quickly. So we would have them, if there's an issue that's serious enough that staff gets involved, where we need to have scooters relocated, they have 1 hour to do so then. And you can see Durham and Raleigh, that was our model for that proposal. Local office requirements. So our ordinance currently has a requirement that each company have a local office to field complaints or answer questions. In theory, that sounded good. In practice, it just hasn't worked out very well. It hasn't been very beneficial to people. Everything is basically through the mobile app or online with these devices. That's how you check them out, basically, is through your phone. So that's how people get in contact with the company. And having that local office just hasn't been all that beneficial. And again, none of the other markets in our southeastern region have that kind of requirement.
So Matthew, do they have a storage facility or some sort of garage or some sort of physical presence somewhere?
Yes, sir, they do. They have a warehouse on Cherry Street on the north side of town where they keep their devices.
So when we call in a complaint about a scooter somewhere illegally parked, does it go to that facility? Is that considered their office?
No, sir. It goes to SPIN has a national hotline, basically, that you call and report, and then those, from that location, they get filtered down to the local staff, and then they respond accordingly.
Pick up people that go around and clean up behind them.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Makes sense.
So our ordinance also has a requirement for sidewalk riding detection. So you can see the text there, each electric stand-up scooter must be able to recognize and implement enforcement mechanisms to prohibit sidewalk riding. We're proposing to eliminate that requirement. That's emerging technology. Some companies are figuring out ways to try to make that work. It's not foolproof by any means, but it's still in development. So having that as a requirement just isn't reasonable at this point.
So
Some of that technology is interesting. They're using Google Street View and some other technology to try to figure out exactly where those devices are at any given time.
So theoretically, if they can perfect that, then it would slow down and or stop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So Matt, how do we regulate scooters on sidewalks?
So that's been the challenge, certainly the rider behavior, and the parking as well. We can keep the devices out of certain zones. We can keep them from being parked in certain zones. But when you get down to the level of a sidewalk where you may only have 5 to 8 feet, the GPS just isn't accurate enough at that scale. And that's where some of this emerging technology can help, by using Google Street View and other technology to get a better idea of where the device is on the sidewalk, or if it's on a sidewalk at all. But again, that's really in development right now. There's no perfect method for doing that.
So Matthew, we tracked the number of complaints about illegal parking or docking. Do we track the number of complaints about sidewalk riding?
So SPIN does not. So anybody who would have a complaint about that, they could contact SPIN. I don't know if they would think to contact SPIN. Most likely they would contact the city.
Right.
And I have not received a complaint like that in a long time.
Thank you.
Dockless bicycle regulation. So I mentioned before that for the first time we were going to have electric bicycles available for rent through SPIN. When we were developing the ordinance, we just omitted a reference to electric bikes as it relates to restrictions in Old Salem and city parking decks. So we would just update the ordinance to make sure that that's reflected in there.
Ask Councilmember Larson, are we still opposed to these devices being used in Old Salem?
I think you'd have to have a conversation with the management at Old Salem at this point. I think would be useful.
Because of the numbers, this fun and entertainment seems to be the primary purpose for that. And with Old Salem being a big visitor draw, seems like the two would go together hand in hand.
I think the only problem would be if we allow these things on the sidewalk. I can see a real conflict there.
I'd like to have that conversation with the management then and see if
I think
it's
so, too.
feasible to do. Okay, so dockless bikes, we're essentially going to treat them the same as scooters.
Very much so, yeah, except I think the only difference would be that the bikes would be allowed on our trail system. So that,
Right.
that would blend with the existing use of those greenways. So that was it for the proposals. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Additional questions, comments?
I do.
Councilmember Scipio.
I made a note about nightly pickup. I think that's a double-edged sword. You either get them off the street because they become an eyesore, or they can inhibit passage of people in some kind of way, or it's very convenient for people to use. And what we don't know is, will people use them in late evening hours or not? Because we've restricted that use to 9 o'clock, I think.
That's right.
So I don't know if there's a market for them after 9 o'clock. I just think this is good information, because when we did this ordinance, we had no idea what would emerge. And so it looks like it's doing what many people thought. It would be fun for people to ride them, and it takes them to and fro. I think that given the uses, if people are riding them to the buses, to get on the bus, that's great. If they're riding it to work, I think that's good too. Just depends on how far the work is. But I think we are learning a lot about the utility of them, and that there is a place for them in our community. But the nightly thing is still going to be questionable, whether we want them out and about, because when I've seen them, I would call them abandoned. They weren't picked up, so they're just lying down on sidewalks. And I don't know if that's how big a deal that is. And I just see them out every now and then.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, yeah, I think, again, if a scooter ends up in a neighborhood where maybe it wasn't originally deployed, if it's blocking a sidewalk, that's certainly a concern. Now, if it's somewhere that's a location where it's not causing any kind of concern, and it happens to be there for somebody to use later on, there's potential benefit to that. So, and one point of clarification with the nightly pickup requirement, right now, or what we're proposing is that the devices the companies could leave them in the field, but they would be deactivated so nobody could ride. So our nightly kind of time limit for when ridership can happen would remain in effect.
Why would we do that? If we just leave them out, they could be used at 1 in the morning if somebody needs to go somewhere.
Shuts them off. The company shuts them off.
But, I mean, why would they shut them off if they still could get potential users?
So that's what our ordinance requires, is that nobody can ride after 9 p.m. right now. So we can change that. Some communities have, like a Durham, 24/7. I think Raleigh was till 11 p.m. We can change that so that potentially second shift workers could benefit from that. There is potential there.
Be interesting to hear from Durham and what their experience is, and what the usage rate is like.
I think the good news, too, is that we can make changes to the ordinance and then get data to learn about how that impacted it. And then if we need to change at some future date, we still have that ability.
Yeah, the availability of data with this is amazing.
Does it give you data on age of user?
No, so all of the data is anonymous. So we have no information on the individuals who are using the devices.
Other questions, comments? I do just want to say that I think Bird did the entire micromobility market a disservice in the way they deployed the devices initially. I think there was a very visceral reaction to that, which still lingers. But the fact that we've only had 6 negative responses, not that people don't look at them and say, I hate those. There are staff members in this room that do that. But they do serve a purpose. I was surprised that 8% of the people that use them don't own cars. I mean, anytime we can eliminate a car trip, that's good for everybody. So the sort of collateral damage seems to be relatively low. Their behavior's not perfect, but it does seem to be serving a purpose at very little cost to us. So I'd like you to take our feedback and let's talk about implementing some of these changes down the road. Thank you very much. As usual, excellent report.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
I would like clarity, Matthew, on
Matt.
the sidewalk issue. If we could
Yes.
get some clarity on using both motorized bikes and scooters on sidewalks.
Right.
I would like some clarity on what other cities are doing with that or how they're handling that, and whether or not there's some instructions that people receive at the time they commence the operation of these vehicles, what's allowable locations and what's not, certainly bike paths and stuff. And I'm curious about what the council thinks about keeping them off the greenways and strollways, if that's still applicable, or whether we allow bicycles on those places, whether this is an equivalent vehicle to allow. There's a speed limit on these things, right? There's
Yes, yeah, they can't go over 15 miles per hour.
15 miles an hour. So it's not a speed issue, it's particularly, and
Yeah, I would appreciate some feedback on what other communities do as far as
Sure.
greenway access.
Okay.
Strollway access. Great. All right. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, next item.
Item G2, item G2, information item on the city's public parking program.
Another information item. Mr. Fansler, we're expecting your usual high-quality report here.
I will try to deliver, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Appreciate your time this evening to provide an overview of our parking program. And so if you'll bear with me for the next few minutes, we'll try to do just that. Let's see here. So briefly, we'll kind of go over these as an on-street highlight, and then we'll kind of, as a general overview, highlight kind of where we're heading off to with our parking program. So right off the bat here, our on-street program, we do have about 1,300 on-street spaces downtown. 550 of those are meter spaces, as you're familiar with those. And then roughly 100 of those spaces are controlled by the digital pay stations there in various locations, particularly right outside this area of downtown. Of course, the remaining of those spaces, the balance, are time restrictions. Those are the 1 hour, the 2 hour zones that you see all littered throughout downtown. And of course, as you well know, there's currently no use of technology-based payment or parking kind of app-based payment options today. So let's talk about a little bit of the goals of our on-street program. Of course, we're trying to encourage the convenient, short-term use for patrons and promote that higher turnover use for that curb. In addition to that, we're encouraging that as a byproduct, as a long-term parking, for those to seek that parking off-street and use our off-street parking facilities and our parking decks and lots that we have around downtown. Let's talk a little bit about the rates. Still today, we're still charging 25 cents an hour in the single space meters, as well as our pay stations. Of course, you see the time restrictions there. The one thing to note with the pay stations, as I indicate there, we do have a tiered rate system for the pay stations. It goes up by hour, and then, of course, to a $10 max, anything over 6 hours. And again, the idea there, going back to those goals, is to really incentivize turnover on the street and driving those long-term uses to the off-street facilities. So we were kind of asked to take a look at some peer municipalities and how's this handled as far as rates go around. And so some of these sister cities you see here, and you can obviously see there on the screen how we're comparing. And then, of course, we mentioned, as earlier, we mentioned that we currently don't have any technology-based application, and these we were highlighting do have those technology-based payment structures in these other sister cities. And you can see the rate structures there, significantly less in Winston-Salem currently that we're charging.
Jeff, do they have any current coin operated at any of these places other than Winston-Salem still sticking quarters in the machines?
So to answer that, I'm not as familiar with some of these, but I do know that there are some options. I think it's important to know that the mobile pay phone app is the option. It provides another way of payment, but it does not solely exclude the coin-based operation.
In most of my research, most cities that use a mobile parking app also have, you can use card, you use an app, and you can also use coins.
That's correct, and that's what we're seeing with some of these in our preliminary research as well. Getting back to the pay-by-phone applications, of course, as I noted, Passport Parking and Park Mobile, those are two of the major players that we see. Those two are very user-friendly, and they really geo-fence the areas of and show you what available parking are. The thing there, they allow customers to pay using that toll-free telephone number, or of course, you can go right on the application and then find the space that you're, usually they're numbered, or there's some identifier that tells you what geolocation you're at, and you can pay by that particular location. Of course, there are additional fees associated with these services that you have to deal with simply because you're using that software service. Of course, the advantages, it does streamline operations. It does have the ability to add time. And I think that user experience is a key takeaway there. You're not running back out to the meter or trying to understand exactly how long, you know, if it's pouring down rain, you have to figure out how long you're going to be somewhere. You can do that from your phone and make those time adjustments. Of course, it does have the ability to integrate with other parking technology. We just talked about how you can do coin-based and have the mobile option as well. So it's good integration with existing technology. And how you interface the two. And one of the benefits of it really is how we can report. We can see where the turnover is, the reporting, and how the metrics come back from the software to indicate what's being used, where it's being used, and really that whole reporting metrics that you can get from these applications is a key benefit. And of course, lower maintenance costs. You're using something outside. It's not the mechanical meters that have that are weathered all the time and having to deal with those maintenance needs constantly. And then lastly, of course, with this technology, it is very scalable. As you can deploy it as zones change, different changes, you change rates, or you grow your city or whatever, you can make those scalable adjustments. On the flip side, of course, there are a few disadvantages, as noted. Of course, the technology barrier, no secret there. It does require the literacy there to be able to make those entries on your phone or have the equipment as far as a smartphone or that type of device to, of course, have the application to do the parking pay by the app. And of course, it does require you to have the credentials and create a login, so there is that accountability there to make sure that you're assigning yourself to that space or your vehicle to that particular space. Let's talk a little bit about how we manage on-street parking in our city. Of course, we do have our parking enforcement team and our staff. We do have 3 enforcement officers. You can see the parking patrol vehicle there. And we do enforce Monday through Friday, and it is free on nights and weekends as indicated by the time restriction there. Transitioning now to our off-street program, the city currently owns and operates 2 off-street parking facilities, one being the 6th Cherry Trade parking deck, and then, of course, the 4th and Church parking deck, as well as 3 surface lots. City code does identify a 4th lot. That is the Union Station lot, is outside of the downtown area. So just for that clarification, we highlighted the 3 downtown surface lots. And that's what you see here. Those 3 lots are identified as well as those 2 parking deck lots. Parking deck structures as identified in this chart and highlights the rate structures that we do have off-street. We do charge $1 an hour and then, of course, a $9 daily max on our off-street facilities, just a little bit less than the maximum for the on-street for obvious reasons, trying to incentivize the off-street use. And then, of course, you see some of the fees there for our just a few smaller surface parking lots that we do operate.
Jeff, where is that northern part?
Yeah.
Where is that and shuttle? Where is that located?
That is the lot adjacent the Public Safety Center. It is there at Marshall Street.
Across the street?
Across the street. Mm-hmm.
Oh,
It's a shuttle lot there. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's not I don't know the number of spaces there. It's not a very big lot, and it's often forgotten about. So I wanted to highlight the use. Brought this up. The 4th and Church parking deck has about 1,500 spaces, and right now we have rented and leased a significant portion of that parking deck. As you can see, we're over 1,000 committed spaces today. And 6th Cherry Trade, not as many as a smaller deck, and we have not allocated as many spaces, largely because, of course, we try to reserve those for, obviously, convention use there and make available space for when we have events at the convention center. And then, of course, the City Hall lot has different uses, of course, for this building, City Hall needs, and that does vary a little bit as far as what we use it for there, but only 90 spaces there at this lot right outside the building. Taking again a look at the peer cities and their off-street rate structure, you can see again how we compare. By and large, we're still a little bit lower than our sister cities, and you can see the comparison there shown on the screen. So what will it take? And as far as, maintenance, upgrading our equipment and where we're trying to go with our parking equipment and system. Right now, our pay stations, I mentioned we do have some of those on street are metered and managed by the pay stations. They do accept cash and coin, and they are credit card capable. And of course, they can be integrated to do mobile app integration should we choose to go that route. Of course, I just wanted to highlight there, if this is something we choose to expand on, you can see there are significant costs for one. Right now, we're looking at about $18,000 for a new one of those solar-powered on-street pay stations. Of course,
Kiosk style.
kiosk style, yes, correct. Similar to ones that we have now, that's correct. And then the existing single-space meters, they are not capable. I mentioned they are older, mechanical. They're not they are not programmable, and we're really limited there. And so, modernizing those to allow for programmable and updating the mechanism in those, you can see the prices there to get those more current, where we could implement some rate adjustments or have a better system to manage outside of the more mechanical, older style that we currently use. So along those lines, let's talk about what has been done to date, and then we can talk about where we're headed. Council has approved a rate increase. So I mentioned 25 cents is what we currently charge. There is a 50 cent rate as approved by City Council. It is in City Code, and we are moving towards that direction. Of course, the challenges there was overhauling all the meters, overhauling all the stations to allow for that, and the actual equipment needs to make those adjustments. Again, and so also Council has also authorized the parking meter upgrades. And what do I mean by that? So the rate increase has been approved. I just mentioned we had to go to changing out our equipment to be able to implement that. And you guys have approved the necessary funds to go out and procure that equipment so we can upgrade those single-space meters. And then lastly, we do have a budget appropriations for an RFQ. And I'll spend a little bit more time as I go to the next slide talking about that RFQ for parking systems analysis. So this is where we recognize the need to get it right. And I think that's the intent here. We have a hybrid system now with the mechanical and the kiosks and the blended system. And what we're trying to do is, go out and solicit those services for someone that does this nationwide or does this a lot more in depth than we do, and provide those technical services to really help modernize our parking system, tell us what we need, how we can integrate our existing infrastructure and get to where we need to be, what technology is going to be most efficient, most manageable for our staff, for our resources and our current needs, and make those recommendations that we can ultimately have something that is going to be more manageable long-term and provide us, getting us into a more modern system. We're looking, actually that RFQ is out on the street now, and it'll close here in the next few days. And we're looking to take this back, hopefully bring it back to you guys in February to hopefully recommend a firm to help us do that and make these recommendations, and we'll work with that consultant on such. But we're looking for a February 2023 award for that. Now, I did mention that we have got already approval from City Council to purchase the single-space parking meter equipment to upgrade and change out the mechanisms to a digital platform that we can implement the 50 cent increase. And all those mechanisms have been ordered. We have received those, and we're looking to roll those out this year. And we're going to work with our parking enforcement and our parking staff on that rollout plan. And of course, they're going to be, we'll likely have to work with our marketing team and how we market this and how we get the message out and what we're doing. So more information to come on that, but our plan is for a rollout in this calendar year of those new of those new single-space meters that we can then implement, would have the ability to implement our previously approved 50 cent rate increase.
Oh, just a quick question on that last point. Since they're going to be new meters, are they going to be easy to program for higher parking rates, and they also be able to use an app on your phone?
So great question, Councilmember Scipio. Right now, we do not have an approved mobile application, but it does allow for programmable coin base. So essentially, we could program the meter to accept a higher per hour charge. Right now, we do not have that capability.
And these new meters would not be able to be adapted to become a smart?
They can be adapted, yes.
Oh,
they can be, yes.
They can.
Yes, and that's the benefit of the mobile pay-by-app applications, the smart park, the park mobiles. They can be integrated with the single-space meters very, very, very seamlessly. Mm-hmm.
And do we have enough for all? I think it's 550. Is that how many meters we're going to be replacing?
I'm not exactly sure how many meters we were able to purchase. I can follow up with you. If it's a one-for-one replacement, I'm not exactly sure based on how far the dollars were able to be stretched, but I can follow up with you and let you know exactly.
I have two more questions.
Sure.
who actually would be replacing this equipment? Is it internal staff, or would we be hiring outside?
So we feel confident that staff will be able to make these. These are something that we can go out, and it's not like a construction project where you're having to I mean, again, it's all self-contained unit, so we're going to go out and swap. Hopefully it's just a one-for-one swap out of the meter that's there. And so I guess time will tell depending on the rollout and our staffing ability. Right now, I don't think that we have intentions to hire this work out.
And then my final question is there any infrastructure, federal dollars, that might be able to be applied for to upgrade our parking systems?
So good question, and I would politely ask that I could research that and
Thank you.
come back at a later time and see what dollars may exist for something that would fit that category.
Okay. Might be under EPA for some kind of solar application, and it might be under DOT.
Just ask Leslie. Just ask
Just
Leslie.
ask,
Fair enough.
oh, that's right, ask Leslie to do your research for you.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Burke.
Yes, thank you so much. Great presentation. What will we do with the meter equipment that we currently have once we swap it out?
Councilmember Scipio, great question. I cannot say that we have an intended use, and frankly, I'm not sure how useful they would be outside of the scrap metal, potentially.
Actually, I can kind of answer that. People pay money for them as souvenirs, right? But people also pay money for them as parts machines who still have existing that style, because you can't buy the replacement stuff from the manufacturer. So I actually read an article about this a couple of years ago where there was, the value of them was, everybody expected them to be total junk, but they're worth something. So I'm sure we'll explore that, but that would be.
We will, yeah. We won't dispose it until we do our due diligence, for sure.
Thank you.
John?
When let's say you're projecting a rollout of 50 cents per hour in 2023 this year. That's for the old meters or
That's
the new
correct.
meters?
So that's for the, what we'd like to do is try to minimize the zones where we have 25 and 50. I think it makes comprehensive sense to try to do everything as comprehensive as we can. The ability and the good thing with the programmable meters is we can roll them out still at 25 cents. And then we can work with our marketing team on how we implement that rate increase and do it strategically. It's not like we will have, well, we got 3 done today, we're going to have these 3 at 50 cents and everything else is 25 cents. I think the ability there is to be able to program them based on the rate that we want to charge and try to have some systematic rollout where it makes sense.
I think it's good.
Just 2 questions.
I think it's good.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, John, I'm sorry.
Go ahead,
No,
John.
I think it's time we looked competitively at what our rates are, and clearly we're way behind the curve on this one.
I'm going to let you ask another one.
One more.
You had
Thank you very much.
only 2.
How much money do we make off of these parking meters? And is the amount covering all of our expenses to have parking meter people? Or are we making more money off of the parking tickets? And you can look back at that. We can get that at a later date.
Yeah.
But
I don't think we can look at it as an enterprise fund right now. I think we pay a lot more to maintain them than we do bring in revenue.
Yeah, and you know, challenges too with where we've been in the past 2 years, and a lot of those affect what we've been able to pull in with downtown parking. So we can get you that information on what we have. I just don't think at this time that I can share that with you.
All right, Mr. Fansler, another great job. I've got a couple of comments. I'm happy to hear that we've got 780 free parking spaces downtown. People say, well, there's no free parking downtown, but in fact there is. The issues that we have with parking are a result of the success of downtown. More people want to be there, so you've only got so many spaces, so there is this competition for it. And I think it's important for us to meet people where they are, and where people are is not pulling quarters out of their car to put into meters. So we need to adapt. I also think that even though we are in an inflationary time where people's pocketbooks are already getting pinched, I think we also have to balance that with the quality of service that we provide. And I don't know that 50 cents gets us to the point where we're providing a quality service that people expect. I'd like to investigate a $1 increase all at once, go to a $1 increase all at once. And I'd also like to investigate, and no conversations have been held with employers downtown about how to keep the impact of parking rate increases from affecting their employee base. There's been conversations about that. We do have space probably in some of our decks that we could structure a deal to, again, keep the pain from hitting the employee base downtown. Because we want the spaces in front of our retail, or our restaurants and our retail places, we want those really to be occupied by customers, not by employees. So information on that would be greatly appreciated as well.
Sir.
And I'll just throw this in, and I've said this before, I'm a big supporter of downtown, but I think when we keep our rate structure the way it is, the rest of Winston-Salem is subsidizing downtown parking. And from a fairness standpoint, that's not good. So the folks who are using the parking spaces downtown should really pay what it costs. Right now, the rest of the city is subsidizing inexpensive parking downtown. So we're passing that cost on to the rest of the community. And our studies of what other cities can charge shows that the public is willing to bear those prices. We are not exorbitant. We are nothing like, there are other cities that we can point to that parking rates are much, much higher. So I think $1 an hour is what I would like to point towards, and like to get feedback from full council and from staff on what the feasibility is of that. I just think we can provide a better product.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Again, appreciate the good job there. All right, anything else from committee? Very good. Then we shall stand adjourned. Thank you very much.